right. Next up, Zurich University of the Arts. There's Daniel. You're here. That's great. This is an organization committed to a dynamic and very alive type of strategy instead of the stale, linear ones we know from management textbooks. This approach is holistic, inclusive, and simple, and has actually led to a redesign of everything from the board meetings to the operating model. So Daniel quite literally is putting the edge in strategy. I've been looking forward to that one. Joining us from Zurich, a self-identifying enterprise agility navigator. Please give Daniel a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. Not easy to step into these high expectations. 10 years ago, I was at my first intersection. I haven't been to all, but did I learn a lot since then. And it's my honor to try to give a little bit back from what I learned on this journey. I can tell a little bit about Zurich University of the Arts, in case you don't know it, which I guess you don't know it. It's one of the larger universities in Europe, so there's about 3,500 to 4,000 students. There's at least 5 disciplines, basically all of the arts except of architecture, which is a little bit debatable because there's game design, which is kind of architecture. There's around 700 to 800 staff. It's governed by, of course, the state. It's a state university. It's internationally accredited. So it's rather complex. Fantastic. So with the fabulous support of Wolfgang, thank you, we will improvise and move through the slides. On this slide, you see the entrance of the University of the Arts of Zurich. I think it's not even a real picture, but what you see is there's a lot of things going on. And this is kind of the situation that the university is in. There's a lot in the ecosystem. Politics have some expectations, students have some expectations. Art is political, so daily politics also influence the doing. There's a lot of trends. And on the next slide, I tried to kind of put this together. If you are an enterprise, there's things that pull you towards the future that can be ecosystem trends. Some of them you can anticipate or you're even at the forefront. At ZHdK, for example, art tech is quite a thing. But there are also other trends and developments in the ecosystem, like part-time. There's so many students who study part-time because their parents or their work, not everybody can afford to be a full-time student. So this is challenging for the enterprise. Sometimes the internal situation also pulls you towards change because you use old software and tools that is so annoying that you want to change. And at the same time, things are holding you at the now or in the past. This can be habits. You have always done it that way. That's usually uncertainty, the fear of something new. And on the next slide, I tried to visualize this. We heard from Yuri yesterday that there is research on how you balance dynamic systems so they don't blow up. And in organizational research, there's a similar model. You basically have a balance of the stable core that you want to keep, that runs your business, where you earn the money. And on the other side, the kind of agile development to deal with all the change and all the dynamics in the ecosystem. And this is really the challenge that also ZHdK had. How can we build and stabilize our core excellence, which is something like better processes, refocusing on the quality of research? How can we create a really lean governance so that we don't that we are not burdened too much with regulations and with doing things a certain way, with controlling. And at the same time, innovate towards the things that are required, requested from the ecosystems and from stakeholders. And how can we have a mindful leadership in these situations where we do not have a governance that guides us? And this is always a bit of a balance. Are we going more to the one side to stabilize? Or are we going more to the other side and to change? And if you're looking at the recent times, a lot of instability was there and a lot of change. New study models, requirements from the outside, from the governance. So there was a lot of instability. And at the same time, the strong need to go back to a little bit more stability, to know what are we doing actually tomorrow, to focus on the core. And with this in mind, on the next slide, there was the typical situation. Based on a lot of discussion in the house and with external stakeholders, the board came together and they created a strategy paper. This is what typically happens. You create a strategy paper and you have the solutions, you made the decisions, this is where we want to go. But how can we make this to a living strategy so that it's actually implemented and that it's adopted if things change again in the environment? It's a big question mark. And on the next slide, there's a bit of a bold statement. Research says the widely held beliefs about how to implement strategy are just plain wrong. And this reflects in most of strategy implementation endeavors, about 70%, Gardner says, fail. So ZHdK knew about this, and they knew they have to go about it differently. But they did not really know how to go about it differently. How can we strategize in a modern way? So on the next slide, you see this is the typical situation. You have a strategy gap. On the one side, you have found your identity, and you know where to go, you set the purposes. And on the other hand, you have the organization, the architecture, and they're disconnected. And you need to find a way to bring them together, because if you do not, what happens is that you will have what Mintzberg calls emergent strategy. So you don't really have the strategy that is intended on paper, but something happens that happens in the architecture, in the organization, what people do, what culture, culture is just, if you look back, is the emergent strategy, the decisions you made, but you did not make them conscious. So you kind of have to bridge this strategy gap. And on the next slide, you see, if you put this together, you create an intersection, and the intersection is the organization. Why is it the organization? Because you have to organize yourself a little bit differently in order to do that. You need to start a dialogue between the people who make the decisions and who dream up the scenarios where to go, and the people who implement and activate the strategy. So you need a feedback loop. And this is actually what agility is about. You create a feedback loop. The challenge is that you need to reorganize a bit. You need to have new ways of working together in order to establish this feedback loop. You will have more dialogue. So some say, okay, cool, now we have closed the gap, let's go. It's not that easy. We need a third facet, a third perspective. Especially on universities, there is a long tradition of participation, of people having their voice heard. And on the next slide, you see this third facet, the experience. So what good is it if you're in the ivory tower and you decide on a paper and then you figure out some people who implement it and you talk a lot, but it does not really relate to what people are experiencing and what people are really needing. So you need this experience facet, the tasks of the various stakeholders, to feed in and to feed back and to feed forward. And this is actually quite challenging, because who is actually the person who is experiencing it, right? Okay, maybe you have your stakeholder maps and you have your personas, but if you then choose to choose people for participation, whom do you choose? Like, what is the scope of participation? Do you ask everybody? Like, have a big room planning, a World Cafe with 3,000 students and 800 staff, and maybe 200 politicians who are also involved, and you have this every month because you want to iterate? Or do you choose selected people? And who do you inform about it, and to which degree? And if people participate, to which degree do they participate? Are you just telling them or selling them, or do you collaborate, or are you asking them to do it for you? So there's many dimensions behind this, of course. If you bring together all these perspectives, well, there you have strategy. You might note this picture of the facets, and I really love this because it's a common language. You think that it's static, but it's not. It's actually permanently, dynamically evolving. And at ZHdK, we started the experience perspective because there's some stakeholders who have some needs, some top tasks, and then you will check, okay, does it fit with your brand? And then you adjust your strategy. And these stakeholders might be from outside and might be from inside, and this might be different things. So you have to go in circles and in circles and in small circles. It's very dynamic. And it's, of course, not on the very high level. Yesterday, Klaus talked about the flight levels. And you see, as a reminder for myself, I made like 3 small hamburger menu-like lines on the top. So this is a very zoomed out satellite perspective, right? But strategy you can use on several flight levels. Actually, we use it on several flight levels, and then it becomes really powerful because you can use the same thing on a department level, the same tools, and then if people are both in the board but also heading a department, they don't have to switch, they use the same logic. If you're in a certain topic and you just want to change one small thing, you go about it in the same way. You also think about what are the expectations of your stakeholders, what would this mean for our architecture. So let's dive in how we do it actually. On the next slide, we see the strategic level, the highest flight level. And we went about it by doing 3 things. We used certain instruments that make it easier. They are usually kind of map-based, and they are kind of living documents. On the strategy level, it's a strategy map. And in addition to that, you can dive into purpose cards. Some of you might know this as OKRs. It's kind of an in-depth description of what are the purposes, what are potential directions, thrusts, some call it, or key results, what could be performance indicators or development indicators. And besides this mapping or tool or instrument level, one very powerful way to change things is where people actually get together. So what we did is we changed the regular meetings. We did not put new meetings on top, we just used the meetings that were there anyway and gradually changed them. So typically, there's a quarterly review where you look at the numbers. We still do that, we do it differently. Typically, there's an annual retreat. We still do it, we do it differently. And typically, people come together in kind of work groups or sessions or teaming or however you call it. We still do it, we just do it a bit differently. Let me show you how we do this. On the next slide, you see our strategy map. Some of you might recognize this is a strategic choice cascade. So you ask, what is your ambition? You ask where you play. You ask how you win. You ask which key capabilities do you need to win. You see where are the action fields that you might need to change to employ all this. And of course, we need to look at our actual organization. Where is this done? And on the bottom line, there's where the value is created, our stakeholders. So it's a very simple map that shows you the whole strategy. We use this in several ways. First of all, we use it to make transparent how the organization, the enterprise is set up and what is our strategy. So it's not just 20-page paper, but it's one picture. This makes it easier to grasp. It also makes it easy to put labels, like under the direction on it, to say, okay, this is the perspective for the next year. You can have over the time several perspectives and scenarios how it will change. You can put labels on it, like the yellow dots, that indicate the status. Are we there yet? Are we on a good way or not? You can put this on all the things. Also, you can zoom in into detail and zoom out. What we did as well, like Sonia told about strategic narratives. This is kind of the key information that is used by communication to tell the narrative, to tell the story, and used by multiplicators like the board members to tell the story about the strategy. You tell a story very similarly, like this row goes. And if we are then in our regular meetings, we look at it. We make a strategy review, and it goes a little bit like this. You go from stakeholder to stakeholder and ask what happened since the last time we met. Did something change? Are there any opportunities, any risks? Okay, which risks? For example, there might be a risk from the student about the connectedness, and that might implicate one of the goals. So you can draw the lines and see, okay, where did the issue pop up and what is related? And from there you can decide, should we take an action or not? This helps shared understanding and, surfaces the issues. And we usually go in rounds from all of the board members through all of the areas. And this is like a 45 minutes event. So very quickly you go from the stakeholders to the organization to the action until you have an updated map. Of course, you can use this also in different meetings, but at least in the regular meetings you use it. We started on the highest flight level, but it's not the only one. On the next slide, there's a quick overview on the portfolio level, like where you coordinate the various initiatives. And we have at least two portfolios. One is the change portfolio. It's like the lean innovation. And the other one is the product portfolio. It's like what your offerings are. And they're structured very similarly. I will not go into detail. You probably all know about portfolio management. If not, please talk to me in the break. So maybe go further, one slide further, and even one slide further. If we are on the lower level, on the initiative level, where you actually implement change, I would like to show you one detail that we used to show you how we use EDGY, even with tools that are not within the EDGY world. So on the next slide, you see what we call an organizational map. We started this as a kind of abstract representation of the organization instead of the typical organizational map, in order to put politics away and put power away, but put in focus what is actually the impact. So we mapped all the organizational units according to impact. Are they impacting the ecosystem? Are they impacting the business? Are they more a service organization, or are they just coordination? And this way we had a more informed discussion about what are you actually doing, and is this the right cut, and can we simplify? And wouldn't it make sense to structure your cost center in this way because you're a service organization? And wouldn't it make more sense to have this unit over there because it's market facing, without having all the discussions, are you my boss or are you my boss? And as you can see, it has similar colors. So we use this visual language and the language and repeat and repeat and repeat. We did not introduce EDGY as EDGY, but just use the symbols, the colors, the language in order to bring some coherence and reduce the mental load. On the next slide, there's of course the same for the product. On the next slide in detail. And on the next slide, maybe this is also interesting. Not everything is top-down. A lot of things are bottom-up because this is where the information is. So if you look at the product portfolio, how can we improve some bachelor program, for example? Then we can ask several stakeholders who are in this program. We did this in iterations with representatives from students, from administration, from teaching staff, to figure out, okay, where are we quite good and where are we not so good? And this is not a benchmark, but this is an indicator where we could look deeper to figure out how to improve. And this bubbles up from bottom up. So on the next slide, I have kind of a summary, what we are trying to achieve, and I think achieved to a good way. We establish a holistic view by having all these perspectives all the time. Also, it's very iterative. Usually we start with an idea and then bring together people and refine the idea, and then we see, okay, do we need different people? And to which degree do we need them to participate? And at some point, the story is right enough to be told to a wider audience. I was talking a lot about participation because it's a very important one, especially in this context. It gives us really high quality on the solution, but also on the understanding of the issues. And also it gives a higher traction. We do not need to anchor a strategy because everybody was involved in creating the strategy. The flight levels and time horizons, they give a higher focus. So with all the things going on, you get a good orientation. And of course, it's quite fractal. So two of the departments started quite early to use the same system for their own departments. And this way, again, you reduce complexity because everybody started to use the same language. Yeah, well, short overview of what we do at University of the Arts, what StratEDGY could be. And I'm really happy to hear your insights, your opinions about strategy. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Daniel. There we go.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you could tell us what made it different in the sense that you're dealing with a university instead of a regular company for profit or another sort of enterprise or organization.
I think there's quite a lot of similarities. In this specific enterprise, there is a high openness towards new. That might also be because of the people who work there. And there is a high sense of collaboration. So that made it differently. In terms of driving factors from the ecosystem, like financial pressure from outside and complexity and old tooling and lack of space, it's very similar to even banking. So there's really high specificities of universities in terms of the culture of participation. So I guess that made it quite differently. Yeah, the open-mindedness towards participation. It's not a discussion if we should do it, it's really a discussion how we do it.
Thank you. I'm curious, how did the university found your services? What's your business model? Because I guess it's not pro bono.
It's not pro bono, no, it's part of their budget. Yeah.
No, because it's very difficult to have, for university to have budgets to hire consultants.
Well, what can I say? I think it's a huge difference between investing in McKinsey, who ask ridiculous prices per day and then spend ridiculous amounts of days, or having embedded advisors who maybe navigate and guide, but most of the creation and the doing is done by the people in-house. So this approach of rather coaching than consulting reduces the amount of hours generated by an advisor a lot. So I'm there like less than a day a month, and still we move forward quite quickly. It's kind of maybe I'm lucky with this organization because they have super smart people and interested people, but the approach to advisory is very different. Yeah.
So if I understand well, Daniel, you started from identity, and there the mismatch between strategy and like living strategy was visible, and after that you worked on the red facet to look at the different stakeholder and putting this together, you created the initiative on those areas that were not sufficiently well done. So first, let me know if this is the way you worked. And the second thing is that you have a slide on specifically on identity board teaming. So I'm interested to understand who was part of this team, if it was already there in the organization, or if you have created for the project.
The whole strategic process is mostly driven by stakeholder tasks, like outside-ish stakeholders, like the governance from the state, who have some expectations, and inside stakeholders, like students who have expectations and staff who have expectations. So it's the tasks are there in the beginning. So we moved kind of from the experience facet to the identity facet. And it always goes back and forth, because if you're deciding on goals, you need to look at the architecture facet to see what's actually feasible and where's the potential, and do I disrupt something? And you also have to go back to the experience, do I disrupt something, right? If I decide on a balance where there's a lot of change, then you disrupt the experience of the everyday, of the working people. So this is not so good. So you have to kind of pace it in a certain way. So I think it's not a really linear process. It's driven by experience, by the tasks, and it then goes quite in fast circles, yeah. But usually clockwise. Yeah. The other question, the university board is kind of the C-level board equivalent in organizations. So it's the director, the chief of services, and the heads of the departments. Plus there's guests who are non-voting guests. So it's very similar to C-level. Yeah. And there's a small team of people from the university development and the general secretary who drive this, and they work together with the board and with selected members who participate on the topics. And after about half a year, we moved this into a standard process, and we have a process owner in the strategy department.
I'm just wondering, how long did it take to bring the university to where they are? Because EDGY just went out, so. And what kind of intervention, of actions did you do to help those guys to get there?
So what I was approached by university because they struggled with this challenge. And then we had a few conversations in various circles where I introduced them to how I would go about it and told them that I don't have an answer. I just have kind of an idea where to go. Then I drafted the StratEDGY concept, more or less. So there is a shared understanding what would be the approach. And from there, we first changed the way how we go through this regular meeting. And from there, build step by step. And sometimes build in detail on some certain initiatives that we're pressing. And usually within these initiatives, it gained traction because it's a smaller circle. And then people thought, oh, this is an interesting way to work. Can I use this for my area? And this way it kind of spreads. Yeah.
Just one comment, amazing what you've done there. There's a lot of bloodletting in the field of strategy. We know that 20,000 books, yeah, everybody talks about it, but we are still in ancient times when it comes to strategy. And you beautifully showed how easy it can be with EDGY. You just answer, who are you? What do you want as an enterprise? Who are your customers? What do they want? And how can you deliver it? That's the architecture phase. That's easy. That's strategy. Not that easy. One remark, and the second remark is, I've heard some rumors that this intersection guy is opening up the publication process, and yeah, maybe that could be a cool tool there.
Yeah, I heard some rumors about that as well. Yeah.
Ooh. I think that's a very good note to leave it on, actually. So please give Daniel a final warm applause.